He didn't just shout at his pregnant wife. He grabbed her arm in front of 300 wedding guests, dragged her outside the eco-hotel ballroom, and shoved her belly first into a concrete pillar while calling her a village rat who didn't deserve to stand beside him. That night, Chidinma Nwosu, 6 months pregnant and bruised, lay bleeding in a taxi while her husband returned to the reception to laugh with his colleagues and his new boss, Mr. Okonkwo. Emeka thought she was a nobody from a poor Enugu village who got lucky marrying him. He had no idea that the woman he humiliated cooked his meals before dawn while secretly running a 45 billion naira pharmaceutical empire her father left her. He never knew that on every confidential document he never bothered to read, her full name wasn't just Chidinma Nwosu. It was Chidinma Nwosu-Okorie, CEO and majority shareholder of Okorie Pharmaceutical Industries, the parent company that owned 68% of Fortress Holdings, the very firm where he worked. While Emeka celebrated his promotion that night, security footage of his violence was already being copied, financial audits with his name were being opened, and a boardroom reckoning was being quietly prepared. From that moment, this was no longer a story about a quiet, helpless wife. It became a silent war, one fought with corporate power, legal precision, and a justice so devastating he would never recover. Dear viewers, thank you for being here. If you watch without subscribing, it's like letting Chidinma's voice disappear beneath that wedding music. When you click that button, you stand with every woman who was told to stay quiet, every child protected by a mother who finally chose herself, and every heart that refused to stay small. Please subscribe now, and, in the comments, tell me where you're watching from. Chidinma Nwosu-Okorie, 29 years old, 6 months pregnant and perpetually underestimated, sat at a wide mahogany desk in a penthouse office overlooking Victoria Island. The Lagos skyline stretched beneath her like a kingdom she ruled in silence. Documents piled high around her, each one marked confidential, each one carrying the power to shift entire industries with a single signature. Her calm eyes moved over folders labeled holdings, executive approvals, and quarterly projections, her pen moving with practiced precision. The cool afternoon light reflected off the golden seal pressed into every document. Okorie Pharmaceutical Industries, a name that made other CEOs straighten their spines and lower their voices. On paper, the CEO of this empire was listed simply as CN Okorie. No photograph, no age, no gender, just initials that most people assumed belonged to an older, reclusive man who valued privacy above all else. No one outside her inner circle knew the truth. The soft-spoken woman who spent her evenings cooking jollof rice in a modest Surulere flat, who wore second-hand wrappers to the market, who answered only to the name Chidinma Okafor, controlled a conglomerate worth 45 billion naira that other executives bowed to without ever knowing her face. She paused mid-signature, her hand drifting instinctively to her belly. The baby kicked gently, a tiny reminder of why she had chosen this double life in the first place. Her mind drifted back 7 years, to the day everything changed. The chapel had been filled with dark suits and muted sobs. Her father's casket, draped in the Nigerian flag, sat at the front while hundreds of mourners filed past. Chief Nnamdi Okorie, the pharmaceutical king of West Africa, the man who had built an empire from a single clinic in Enugu, was gone. And at 22 years old, grieving and terrified, Chidinma had inherited it all. She remembered the board of directors approaching her after the funeral, their faces grave and respectful. "Your father left everything to you," Mr. Ease, the CFO, had said gently. "You are now the majority shareholder and CEO of Okorie Pharmaceutical Industries." She had stared at them, tears still wet on her cheeks, and whispered words that would define the next 7 years of her life. "I can't lead yet. I don't even know who I am without him. I need time to live simply first, to see the world outside these walls, to be loved for who I am, not what I own." The board had agreed. They would keep her position private. The world would know only CN Okorie, a phantom executive who signed documents and attended board meetings through secure video calls. And Chidinma would live as an ordinary woman, searching for love that had nothing to do with money or power. The door to her office opened quietly, and Nwosu-Okorie, 38, her sharp-eyed personal assistant and the only person allowed into this hidden world, stepped inside. Nwosu had worked for Chidinma's father before his death and had sworn an oath of loyalty that went beyond salary or title. "Ma," Nwosu said gently, holding a tablet. "The board is asking about Monday's quarterly review. They want to know if you'll attend in person this time." Chidinma glanced at the calendar on her desk.
Monday.
The same day as Ngozi's wedding. Emeka's younger sister, the one who used to braid Chidinma's hair on Sunday afternoons before Emeka's promotions and pride changed everything. She hadn't seen Ngozi in months, hadn't been invited to any family gatherings, hadn't been treated like she belonged to the Okafor family in so long she'd almost forgotten what warmth felt like. "Tell them I'll attend next month," Chidinma said softly, closing the folder in front of her. "I want to go to the wedding." Nwosu's expression flickered with concern. "Ma, you know how he's been treating you. Are you sure that's wise?" Chidinma looked down at her belly, her hand resting protectively over the life growing inside her. "I just want one more chance," she whispered. "One more chance to be part of a family before this baby comes. Maybe if I show up, if I try, Emeka will remember why he married me." Nwosu said nothing, but her silence spoke volumes. She had seen the bruises Chidinma tried to hide. She had heard the cruel words Emeka muttered when he thought no one important was listening. Chidinma signed the final document with her usual shorthand, just CN, never the full name, never anything that could connect the humble housewife to the corporate queen. She closed the file, stood slowly, her pregnant belly making every movement deliberate, and looked out at the city she secretly owned. "Maybe this time," she whispered to herself, "love will be enough." But deep down, beneath the hope and the longing, a small voice whispered back, "What if it never was?" The evening sun poured through the windows of their modest Surulere flat as Chidinma stood in the kitchen, stirring a pot of egusi soup that filled the air with the rich smell of crayfish and palm oil. Her ankara wrapper was tied loosely around her growing belly, her headscarf slightly askew from the heat of the stove. She had spent the entire afternoon preparing Emeka's favorite meal, hoping that a good dinner might soften his mood enough to talk about the wedding, about the baby, about the distance that had grown between them like a wall she could no longer see over. She heard his key in the lock and quickly wiped her hands on a kitchen towel, turning with a hopeful smile. Emeka walked in wearing a sharp navy suit, his tie loosened just enough to look effortlessly successful. He didn't greet her. He barely looked at her. He simply tossed his briefcase onto the sofa and pulled out his phone, scrolling with the kind of focused attention he used to give her years ago. "Welcome home, my husband," Chidinma said softly, moving toward him. "Dinner is almost ready. I made your favorite." He grunted without looking up. "I'm not hungry." She hesitated, her fingers twisting the edge of her wrapper. "Emeka, I wanted to talk to you about Ngozi's wedding on Saturday. I was thinking I could wear my new ankara, the blue one with the gold threading, and maybe we could." "You're not coming," he said flatly, still staring at his phone. The words hit her like cold water. "What?" Emeka finally looked up, his eyes hard and dismissive. "You heard me. You're not coming to the wedding. I already told my family you're not feeling well." Chidinma's breath caught in her chest. "But Ngozi invited me. She's your sister. I want to be there for her. For your family." "You'll embarrass me," Emeka interrupted, his voice rising with irritation. "Look at you, Chidinma. You look too local, too unkempt. My colleagues will be there. My boss, Mr. Okonkwo, will be there. Important people. I can't have you showing up looking like you just came from the village market." Her hands trembled. She looked down at herself, at the simple wrapper, at her bare feet on the cool tile floor, at the belly carrying his child. "I'm your wife," she whispered. "Then act like it," he snapped. "Stay home. Cook. Rest. Do whatever it is you do. Just don't show up at that wedding and make me look like I'm married beneath me." The words hung in the air like poison. Chidinma opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Emeka had already turned away, walking toward the bedroom while pressing his phone to his ear. She stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, her heart pounding, when she heard his voice drift back, low and warm in a way it never was with her anymore. "Hey, beautiful," Emeka said into the phone, his tone dripping with affection. "Yeah, I'm free now." "No, she won't be a problem. I already told her to stay home." He laughed, a sound Chidinma hadn't heard in months. I know. Listen, about Saturday, wear that red dress I like. I want to introduce you to everyone as my future." Chidinma's knees nearly buckled. She gripped the doorframe to steady herself. "Don't worry about her," Emeka continued, his voice fading as he moved deeper into the bedroom. "She's not part of that world. She never was. You and me, Adiz, we're the real thing." Adiz. Not his sister. A colleague. A woman whose name he spoke like a promise. Chidinma pressed her hand to her mouth, biting back the sob that threatened to escape. Her other hand moved instinctively to her belly, to the child who kicked gently as if to say, "I'm here, Mama. I'm still here." She turned slowly and walked back to the kitchen, her movements mechanical. She turned off the stove. The egusi soup sat untouched, still steaming. She stood there for a long moment, staring at nothing, feeling everything. Then she walked to the small drawer beside the dining table and pulled out a folded piece of paper, the ultrasound photo from her last clinic visit. The tiny shape of their baby, clear and precious, stared back at her. She had been saving it for the right moment, for a night when Emeka would hold her and smile and say he was ready to be a father. That moment would never come. Chidinma folded the photo carefully and slipped it into her purse. Her jaw tightened. Her hands stopped shaking. "I'm going to that wedding," she whispered to herself, her voice steady for the first time in months. "And I'm going to show him exactly who his wife really is." She didn't know yet that by the time Saturday ended, nothing in Emeka's world would ever be the same again. The Eco Hotel rose against the Lagos skyline like a glass fortress, its marble entrance gleaming under the late morning sun as luxury cars pulled up one after another, depositing guests in expensive aso-ebi and designer suits. Chidinma stood across the street for a long moment, her hand resting on her belly, watching the parade of wealth and status flow through the golden doors. Her best Ankara wrapper, the blue one with gold threading she'd spent hours selecting, suddenly felt too simple, too humble, too much like exactly what Emeka had called her, local. But she had come this far. The ultrasound photo pressed against her chest inside her purse like a heartbeat made of paper. She took a deep breath, whispered a quick prayer her father used to say before important meetings, "God of my fathers, grant me favor," and crossed the street. The reception hall was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls from the ceiling, casting rainbow light across tables draped in cream and gold. A live band played high-life music that made the air pulse with celebration. Everywhere she looked, women glittered in expensive lace and coral beads while men laughed loudly, their wristwatches catching the light like small suns. Chidinma recognized some faces from Emeka's office, executives she'd only seen in the company reports she secretly approved, people who had no idea the quiet woman in the modest Ankara controlled their salaries. She spotted Ngozi near the center of the room, radiant in her white wedding gown, surrounded by bridesmaids. For a moment, Chidinma's heart lifted. She remembered when Ngozi used to visit their flat, when she would sit on the floor and let Chidinma braid her hair while they talked about everything and nothing. Before the promotions, before the distance, before Emeka started treating his own wife like a shameful secret. Then she saw him. Emeka stood near the VIP section in a sharp gray suit that must have cost more than 3 months of the rent he thought they could barely afford. His arm rested casually on the shoulder of a woman in a stunning red dress, her makeup flawless, her laughter loud and confident. Adiz. She leaned into him like she belonged there, like she had every right to stand in the space that should have been Chidinma's. Chidinma's throat tightened, but she forced herself to move forward, weaving between tables, her eyes fixed on her husband. A few guests glanced at her, their expressions flickering with confusion, as if they couldn't quite place who she was or why she was dressed so simply at such an extravagant event. She was 10 feet away when Emeka finally saw her. His entire body went rigid. The smile vanished from his face, replaced by something cold and dangerous. He said something sharp to Adiz, who turned and looked at Chidinma with barely concealed amusement. Then he was moving, cutting through the crowd with long, angry strides. "What are you doing here?" he hissed, grabbing her arm hard enough to hurt. Chidinma winced but held her ground. "I came to support your family, to celebrate with Ngozi. Emeka, please, I just wanted." "I told you not to come," he snarled, his fingers digging deeper into her arm. Around them, conversations began to quiet. Heads turned. His colleagues were watching now, their expressions shifting from curiosity to discomfort. "You're hurting me," Chidinma whispered, trying to pull her arm free. "You're embarrassing me," he shot back, louder now. "I told you to stay home. I told you that you don't belong here, that you'd make me look bad, and what do? You show up anyway, dressed like a village rat." The words echoed across the hall. Someone gasped. The band faltered, the music dying mid-note. 300 guests turned to stare. Chidinma's eyes filled with tears, but she reached into her purse with her free hand, her fingers closing around the ultrasound photo. "Emeka, please, just listen. I came because I needed to tell you something important. We're going to have a..." He slapped the photo out of her hand before she could finish. The small square of paper fluttered through the air and landed face up on the polished marble floor near someone's expensive shoe. The tiny shape of their baby, clear and precious, stared up at nothing. "I don't care," Emeka said, his voice dripping with contempt. "I don't care what you have to say. You always do this. You always try to make everything about you." Then he shoved her. Hard. His palm connected with her shoulder, and she stumbled backward, her pregnant belly unprotected, her feet scrambling for balance. She hit the concrete pillar at the edge of the courtyard entrance with a sickening thud, her side slamming into the unforgiving stone. Pain exploded through her abdomen, sharp and terrifying. She slid to the ground, gasping, her hands flying instinctively to cradle her stomach. The world tilted. Voices shouted. Someone screamed. Chidinma looked up through blurred vision and saw Emeka standing over her, his chest heaving, his face twisted with rage, and something else, something that looked almost like fear. Then he spat at her feet. "You ruin everything," he said. Then he turned and walked back into the reception hall, back toward Adiz, back toward the laughter and music that had already started again, as if nothing had happened. Chidinma lay there, curled on the cold marble, her wrapper stained, her headscarf fallen, her baby, oh God, her baby. She tried to breathe, but the pain was everywhere. Madam, please don't move." A young security guard in a crisp uniform dropped to his knees beside her, his face etched with concern. His name tag read Chidi. "I saw everything. I'm calling an ambulance right now." Through the haze of pain, Chidinma noticed someone else standing near the hotel entrance, partially hidden by a marble column. A tall man in an expensive agbada, his phone pressed to his ear, his eyes fixed on her with an expression of absolute disgust. Mr. Okonkwo, Emeka's boss. The man Emeka had been so desperate to impress. He had seen everything. As the security guard helped her sit up carefully, as the distant wail of sirens began to grow closer, Chidinma whispered through her tears, "You will regret this, Emeka. I swear on my father's grave, you will regret this." But Emeka was already gone, disappeared into the crowd of people who had decided that a pregnant woman's pain was less important than free champagne and jollof rice. The ultrasound photo still lay on the ground, forgotten, until Chidi gently picked it up and placed it in Chidinma's trembling hand. "Your baby?" he asked softly. She nodded, clutching the photo to her chest like a lifeline. "Then we protect you both," Chidi said firmly. "Starting now." The ambulance doors swung open and Chidinma was rushed through the emergency entrance of Lagos University Teaching Hospital, the wheels of the stretcher rattling against the tiled floor like a drumbeat of panic. Bright white lights flashed overhead as nurses hurried alongside, their voices overlapping in urgent Yoruba and English. Get a fetal monitor, now. Check her vitals. We need an obstetrician. She's 6 months pregnant. Every sound felt too loud, every movement too fast, and all Chidinma could do was lie there with her hand pressed protectively over her belly, silently begging the life inside her to hold on. A nurse gently lifted Chidinma's wrapper and placed a cold monitor band over her stomach. The machine beeped once, then twice, then fell into a rhythm that made everyone in the room exhale. The baby's heartbeat filled the space like a drum, steady and strong and alive. Chidinma's tears came then, not from pain but from relief so overwhelming it felt like drowning and breathing at the same time. Dr. Nkem Adeyemi, a woman in her late 40s with kind eyes and no-nonsense efficiency, stepped into the examination room and scanned the monitors with practiced speed. She checked Chidinma's bruised arm where Emeka had grabbed her, examined her side where the pillar had struck, then looked directly into her eyes with a mixture of medical concern and quiet fury that told Chidinma this doctor had seen this kind of injury before. Your baby is safe, Dr. Adeyemi said firmly, and Chidinma sobbed openly at the words. But you're not. Your blood pressure is dangerously high. Your body is in shock. If this kind of stress continues, it will threaten both of you. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Chidinma nodded weakly, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. The door burst open and Amara Nwosu, Chidinma's younger sister, rushed in, her face wild with fear and anger. At 26, Amara was everything Chidinma was not: loud, fierce, unafraid to fight. The sister who had begged Chidinma not to marry Emeka in the first place because she saw the warning signs everyone else ignored. Chi-Chi, Amara gasped, grabbing her sister's hand. What did he do? Adiz called me. She said you were attacked at the wedding. That Emeka, her voice broke. Tell me he didn't put his hands on you while you're carrying his child. Chidinma turned her face away, shame burning hotter than the pain in her side. That bastard, Amara whispered, her voice shaking with rage. I'm going to kill him. I swear to God, I'm going to. A quiet knock interrupted her. The door opened and Chidi, the security guard from the hotel, stepped inside hesitantly, still in his uniform, holding a small evidence bag and a USB drive. His young face carried the weight of someone who had seen something he would never forget. Madam, Chidi said respectfully, approaching the bed. I'm sorry to disturb you, but I need you to know something. My company requires all security officers to wear body cameras during high-profile events. When I saw your husband grab you, I activated mine. He held up the USB drive. Everything is recorded. The grab, the slap, the shove, everything he said, everything he did. I've already submitted the original footage to my company's incident report, but this is your copy. For the police. Or for your lawyer. Or for whatever justice looks like for you. Chidinma stared at the tiny device in his hand, barely larger than her thumb, containing evidence that could destroy Emeka's carefully constructed world. Her hand trembled as she reached for it. Why? She whispered. Why would you do this for me?
You don't even know me.
Chidi's jaw tightened. Because my mother spent 15 years with a man who put her in the hospital 3 times, and nobody ever stood up for her. Nobody ever gave her proof. She died thinking she deserved it. His eyes glistened, but his voice remained steady. You don't deserve this, madam. And your baby doesn't deserve to grow up thinking this is normal. Amara took the USB drive from Chidi's hand and held it up to the light like a weapon. This ends now, she said fiercely. Chi-Chi, no more silence. No more protecting him. No more pretending. Dr. Adeyemi stepped forward, holding a sealed envelope. I've documented everything medically. Photographs of your bruises, notes on the impact to your abdomen, my professional statement about the danger this incident posed to your pregnancy. If you choose to press charges, this will support your case. Chidinma looked around the room at these 3 people, near strangers, who had stood up for her when her own husband's family had looked away. The monitor beside her bed beeped steadily with her baby's heartbeat, a sound that reminded her she was no longer making decisions just for herself. She thought about the office in Victoria Island, the one where she signed documents that moved billions of naira. She thought about her father's voice. Power means nothing if you cannot protect the ones you love. She thought about the woman she had been trying to be, humble, quiet, small, and the woman she actually was, the CEO every executive feared without knowing her face. Chidinma reached for her phone on the bedside table, her fingers no longer trembling, and scrolled through her contacts until she found a name most people would never see. Barrister Chukwudi Obi, senior partner, Obi and Associates, corporate and criminal law. She pressed call. The phone rang twice before a deep, professional voice answered. Mrs. Okorie, this is unexpected. How can I help you? Chidinma took a breath, and when she spoke, her voice was no longer the soft, apologetic tone of a woman asking permission. It was the voice of a CEO who had just made a decision. Barrister Obi, she said clearly, I need you to do 3 things. First, file for an emergency protection order. Second, initiate a full forensic audit of Fortress Holdings, specifically the department managed by Emeka Okafor. And third, she paused, her hand resting on her belly. Schedule an emergency board meeting for Monday morning. Tell them CN Okorie will be attending in person for the first time. Tell them it's time everyone knew exactly who I am. There was a brief silence on the other end, then Barrister Obi's voice returned, sharp with understanding. Consider it done. Mrs. Okorie, if I may say, it's about time. Chidinma ended the call and looked at her sister, at the security guard, at the doctor, at the 3 people who had given her back something she thought she'd lost, the belief that she deserved to be protected. What happens now? Amara asked, her voice tight with anticipation. Chidinma's eyes hardened with a quiet certainty that had been building beneath years of silence. She picked up the USB drive and held it like the key it was. Now, she said softly, Emeka walks into the boardroom thinking he's getting a promotion. She looked down at the ultrasound photo, still clutched in her other hand, at the tiny life she had protected even as she fell. And he discovers that the wife he threw away owned everything he ever wanted. The baby kicked, strong and insistent, as if to say, yes, mama. It's time. And somewhere across Lagos, in a building Emeka walked through every day without knowing who truly owned it, preparations for Monday's reckoning had already begun. The hospital room had become a war room. By Sunday evening, less than 24 hours after the wedding, Chidinma's private space had transformed into a command center that would have made any corporate strategist proud. Laptops glowed on the rolling table beside her bed, documents were spread across every available surface, and the quiet woman who had spent 3 years cooking breakfast at dawn had become the general orchestrating her own justice. Barrister Chukwudi Obi arrived first, a tall man in his 50s with silver-streaked hair and the kind of sharp, calculating eyes that missed nothing. He carried 2 thick briefcases and the confidence of someone who had dismantled empires before breakfast. Behind him came Mr. Ease, the CFO of Okorie Pharmaceutical Industries, a meticulous man in his 60s who had served Chidinma's father and had watched her grow from a grieving girl into a formidable leader, even if the world didn't know it yet. Adiz Akoli, her executive assistant, was already there, her laptop open, her fingers flying across the keyboard with the precision of someone who had been preparing for this moment for years. She looked up when the men entered and nodded once, her expression grim but satisfied. The audit is complete, Mr. Ease said without preamble, setting his briefcase on the foot of Chidinma's bed and pulling out a bound report so thick it looked like evidence of a crime, which, as it turned out, it was. Mrs. Okorie, what we found in Emeka's department at Fortress Holdings is worse than we anticipated. Chidinma sat up straighter in the hospital bed, her hand resting protectively on her belly. The baby had been kicking all afternoon, as if sensing the shift in her mother's energy from victim to victor. Show me everything. Mr. Ease opened the report to pages marked with red tabs. For the past 18 months, Emeka has been systematically inflating his departmental performance reports. The Q3 strategy presentation he's scheduled to deliver tomorrow, the one he thinks will secure his promotion, contains projections that are fabricated. The client acquisitions he claims credit for? 3 of them were closed by other team members. The budget savings he reported? Money that was actually redirected from legitimate operational expenses into personal accounts. Barrister Obi leaned forward, adding a second folder to the pile. We traced corporate card expenditures tied to his employee ID. Restaurant bills coded as client entertainment, hotel stays listed as business travel, jewelry purchases marked as corporate gifts, all of it authorized through his access level, but none of it legitimate. The most damning piece, a 7.5 million naira advance he requested for relocation expenses related to his promotion, money he used to lease a luxury apartment in Ikoyi and purchase a Range Rover. Let me guess, Amara said from her chair in the corner, her voice dripping with contempt. The apartment and the car aren't for his pregnant wife. Adiz turned her laptop screen toward the group. On it was a social media post from an account belonging to someone named Adiz Chukwu, the woman in the red dress from the wedding. The photo showed her lounging in a modern apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows, the caption reading, "New beginnings in my new home, blessed beyond measure." The location tag, Ikoyi, Lagos. The date, 2 weeks ago. He moved his mistress into an apartment paid for with company funds, Chidinma said quietly, her voice empty of emotion, as if she were reading a quarterly report instead of dissecting her husband's betrayal. What else? Mr. Ease hesitated, glancing at Barrister Obi before continuing. There's evidence of potential data leaks. Emeka has been in communication with executives at PharmaCorp, one of our competitors. We found email exchanges where confidential product development timelines and pricing strategies were discussed. We believe he was positioning himself for a job offer by providing them with insider information. The room went silent except for the steady beep of the fetal monitor. Chidinma closed her eyes for a moment, absorbing the magnitude of what her husband had become, not just a man who hit his pregnant wife, but a thief, a liar, a traitor to the very company that had elevated him, the company she had built with her father's legacy. Is it enough? She asked, opening her eyes and looking directly at Barrister Obi. Is it enough to terminate him for cause and recommend criminal charges? More than enough, the lawyer replied. With the medical documentation, the security footage, and this financial evidence, we have grounds for immediate termination, asset seizure, and criminal prosecution for domestic violence, corporate fraud, and potential industrial espionage. Chidinma nodded slowly, then turned to Adiz. The board meeting tomorrow. Who's confirmed? Adiz consulted her tablet. All 12 voting members of the Fortress Holdings Executive Board. Mr. Okonkwo as interim chairman. Department heads from finance, operations, and legal. I've sent the meeting notice under your authority as majority shareholder, marked urgent and confidential. None of them know you're attending in person. I simply wrote that CN Okorie has requested an emergency session to address matters of corporate integrity. And Emeka? He received a separate invitation, Adiz said, a slight smile playing at the corner of her mouth. Worded to make him believe it's the formal announcement of his promotion to Vice Director of Strategic Development. He's been texting people all day about it. He has no idea what's actually coming. A knock on the door interrupted them. Dr. Adeyemi entered, her expression concerned but not alarmed. I hate to interrupt, but I need to check your vitals, Mrs. Okorie. You've been under significant stress, and I want to make sure both you and the baby are stable. Chidinma submitted to the examination, letting the doctor check her blood pressure and listen to the baby's heartbeat while her team waited in respectful silence. When Dr. Adeyemi finished, she looked at Chidinma with the knowing eyes of a woman who understood that some battles had to be fought even when the body needed rest. Your pressure is still elevated but improving, the doctor said carefully. Whatever you're planning for tomorrow, I can't medically stop you. But I am asking you, as someone who wants to see you and this baby healthy, to take care of yourself. Justice is important, but so is survival. I've spent 3 years surviving, Chidinma replied softly. Tomorrow, I start living. Dr. Adeyemi nodded and left the room. When the door closed, Chidinma turned back to her assembled team, these people who had worked in shadows to protect her legacy, who had uncovered the truth she had been too afraid to see. "There's one more thing," she said, her voice steady. "Ngozi, Emeka's sister. The wedding we just attended." Mr. Ease pulled out another folder. The 12 million naira loan she received 6 months ago to fund the wedding. It was processed through a private charitable trust your father established, one that makes anonymous loans to families in need. Emeka told everyone, including Ngozi, that the money came from his savings, from bonuses he'd earned through his hard work. "He took credit for my mercy," Chidinma said, shaking her head. "He let his own sister believe he was her hero when it was my money, my father's legacy, that made her wedding possible." Barrister Obi pulled out a formal document. "I've prepared a loan disclosure notice. If you authorize it, we can present it tomorrow during the board meeting. It will make clear where the money actually came from and that Emeka's claim of financial generosity was fraudulent." Chidinma thought about Ngozi, the young woman who had once been kind to her, who had said nothing when Emeka dragged her from the wedding, who had watched in silence as her brother assaulted his pregnant wife. She thought about how complicity, even silent complicity, enabled cruelty to flourish. "Include it," she said firmly. "Everyone needs to know exactly who Emeka Okafor really is." Amara stood up from her chair and walked to her sister's bedside, taking her hand. "Chichi, are you absolutely sure about this? Once you walk into that boardroom tomorrow as yourself, as Okorie, there's no going back to the quiet life. Everyone will know. Your face will be everywhere. The privacy you worked so hard to protect will be gone." Chidinma looked down at her belly, at the child who would be born into whatever world she built from this moment forward. She thought about her father's words, the ones that had guided every decision she'd made since inheriting his empire. "Power means nothing if you cannot protect the ones you love." "I chose silence because I thought it would protect love," she said quietly. "But all it did was protect his cruelty. My child deserves a mother who stands in the light, not one who hides in the shadows hoping not to be hurt." She looked up at each person in the room, at the lawyer, the CFO, the assistant, the sister, the people who had chosen to stand with her when standing cost something. "Tomorrow morning," Chidinma said, her voice carrying the weight of a CEO who had finally decided to claim her throne, "Emeka Okafor walks into Fortress Holdings thinking he's about to become the most important man in the room." She picked up the USB drive Chidi had given her, the one containing footage of her husband's violence, and held it like a weapon forged from truth. Instead, he's going to discover that the woman he threw away was always the only person in that room who mattered. The fetal monitor beeped steadily beside her, a rhythm like a countdown. "Get some rest," Barrister Obi said gently, closing his briefcases. "Tomorrow we end this." As her team filed out of the room, leaving her alone with Amara, Chidinma whispered to her unborn child, "Your father chose power over love. But Mama is going to show you that real power is protecting the ones who cannot protect themselves. Even when it costs everything. Especially then." Somewhere across Lagos, in a luxury apartment he'd stolen money to afford, Emeka Okafor slept peacefully, dreaming of his coming promotion, completely unaware that the hammer of justice had already been raised and was about to fall.